We all know that Race to the Top is a program the federal government has offered to the states. We have put in an application. We did not do as well as many had hoped that we would, and we did not make the final cut and did not get the award. There is an opportunity for us to reapply, and the Commissioner of Education, Alice Segrin, has talked about as a deadline for that to get that done by, I believe, May 1st. And so there is an effort to try to pull together another application, although the governor has made, and I think wisely and rightly made clear, that this will not happen unless there are certain things done legislatively that will change the way that the federal government would view our application. And I think those are the reform issues that the governor has talked about. And I think that that, to me, is the sticking point. Now, there's debate about No Child or Race to the Top, similar to with No Child Left Behind, about how far you want the federal government to be involved in K-12 education in the state. But setting that aside, the issues for reform and the need to reform K-12 education is important, regardless of whether or not we move ahead with No Child or with Race to the Top application. And so I think that the legislature ought to take seriously these challenges that are coming not only from the federal government but from the governor and from a number of people in the legislature, and have been for years. And to me, it is remarkable that there has been such resistance on the part of the majority party, and frankly, I think their allies in the teacher union, to take seriously any of these challenges, any of these ideas. And I hope that we will have an opportunity to do that. I think the governor has made it clear some of those things. There are some bills that are out there. There are bills that are not necessarily partisan. Senator Bonhoeff has a bill on alternative licensure, for example, that certainly would help. Those are things we ought to act on, and it's, to me, remarkable that we have not made more progress on it, and I hope we do.
Well, Senator Poggemiller said that he thought that the governor needs to step in the room and personally come to a committee meeting Tuesday to get things done. What do you think?
Well, I certainly would welcome the governor showing up at our committee. He's welcome any time. I think that's his decision. I'm not sure what that would change. If Senator Poggemiller is saying he doesn't understand what the reform initiatives that the governor wants to do, I don't think that's the issue. I think we understand what they are. To me, the problem is that you've got a teacher union and a DFL party that are so closely aligned that they cannot, I think, objectively look at serious reform, and that's what's needed. I don't know that the governor coming into the room is going to do that. That, to me, seems to be a discussion that the union and their allies in the legislature need to have and talk about what they can do and what they can change and how they can move this forward. But I would welcome the governor if he can show up, but I don't think that is the thing that is critical. We understand what the governor is asking for.
Part of what he's asking, too, is that the governor and the unions are in the same room, too. And he also said other governors had personally engaged more, that more was done under Ventura, Carlson, Quee, and that the governor's work style isn't as engaged with the chairs for education. And if he would come, he could maybe personally move this along.
Well, and I was not here when those governors were here. I don't know what the practice was if those governors showed up in education committees. I think, again, it would be certainly something that we would welcome. I don't know that it is mandatory. I think we understand what the governor's initiatives are. The Commissioner of Education has been before our committee a number of times, and she represents the governor's positions very well. So it's not something that I would say is mandatory, and I don't know, frankly, to what extent the governor is engaging in conversations on his own. But we as the legislature have an obligation to address the bills and the needs to pass legislation. And if there are legislative things that need to be done that could be helpful in advancing the Race to the Top, then we ought to be serious about doing that. And so far, I don't think that there has been much seriousness to do that.
Has the governor engaged you?
Has the governor engaged me? I've talked to him. I've talked to people on his staff. I'm one of those that is not as enthused about the federal involvement in education, but I'm certainly enthused about the ideas to reform education that are a part of that application. And I think we need to do that. I think it's worth doing if there's no money involved, frankly, but that's more of a philosophical question. I think if you are going to seriously focus education, our system of education, on performance, on results, then I think you have to do some things to change the structure, change the system. And that's what these reforms that the governor's talked about, that's what the Race to the Top application talks about. So to me, regardless of the amount of money that's on the table, the question is, do you want the education system to be focused on academic results, focused on student achievement, or do you want the system to be focused on benefits for employees? And frankly, that's what the system is doing today. The federal government offering money, that's certainly a part of the discussion. But the question I think we have to face as a state is, what do we expect from our education system? And that should not be a question of how much money the governor or the federal government is going to give us. It should be a question about what is the right thing to do for Minnesota education. So I'm not discounting the value of the federal incentives that are there, but to me that is not the major reason why you do this, in my opinion. You do it because it's the right thing to do. I personally am not advocating jumping through federal hoops. I'm advocating for the adoption of the reforms that the governor has called for. And I think those things we should do regardless of whether we are successful in the Race to the Top application or not, because I think they're important, I think they are substantial, and I think they would be helpful to the education project. If we do those things and we put together another application and that goes forward, then we will just have an opportunity to decide at that point whether we're going to, I guess, complete the application or not. That's not going to be my decision. But I think there's nothing wrong with saying, are these reforms good reforms? And they are. And so we ought to do them. Well, we've had all session to work on these reforms, frankly, and we just haven't taken advantage of that. I think there's time to, and we've got some bills before the legislature right now, before the committees that we could pass. We could continue the debates on them. So I think there's plenty of time to address these reform issues if there is a willingness on the part of the majority to do it. I think that is the big stumbling block. I don't believe that there's a willingness to really engage in the substance of the reforms that the governor is talking about. And that to me is the sticking point. If there is a seriousnness about that, there's plenty of time to pass these bills.
Can I just say, too, and I think the press got it, but the governor handed out a couple of days ago a full sheet of reform measures that have all gone nowhere as a result of the legislative process over the course of his 8 years as governor. We know about the reforms. So we've, for the most part, many of us have visited them and revisited them. So we know the issue. It's just a matter of, in the next 30 days, can we do something about it? And I would also say this, we get a lot of, if you will, conversation from the other side about the moral obligation of government. Clearly, education is a moral obligation of government. Frankly, in Minnesota, it's a constitutional obligation. And so why we're sitting here literally debating about why we can't have the best education system in America, it's strange to me. I don't understand that. We ought to be coming together and doing the things Senator Hann has talked about, doing the things the governor has talked about. We ought to be advancing our cause in this area. If we're talking about economic prosperity going forward, we all know the key to that is a strong education system and a strong workforce developed around that system.